Good afternoon. Welcome to over 300 UMass Lowell and external visitors to our campus today. We're delighted to have you. My name is Amy Liss. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm honored to serve as the Director of Multicultural Affairs. This event is happening as part of UMass Lowell's second annual Social Justice Week, as we seek to elevate and amplify knowledge and conversation and inspire action towards a just, equitable world for all of us. And we remind ourselves and each other that we have the opportunity to impact change within our everyday lives, systems, and experiences. Many thanks and much gratitude is offered to the Provost's Office, the Division of Equity and Inclusion, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, Hospitality and Event Services, the Office of Community Relations, the Inn and Conference Center, and of course, our moderator and my new friend, Dr. Erica Gagne. Now to start us off, I'm honored to introduce our Chancellor, Julie Chen. Julie Chen was named Chancellor of UMass Lowell after leading the university's growing research franchise into a nearly $95 million annual operation. Unanimously appointed by the UMass trustees in May 2022, Chen assumed her role as UMass Lowell's fourth Chancellor and just the second woman to lead the university of more than 18,000 students last summer on July 1st, 2022. Chen previously served as Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development, a role that included managing industry partnerships, technology transfer, startups and innovation, core research facilities, and economic development programs. Whew, just that. As UMass Lowell's Chief Research Officer, Chen facilitated numerous innovative models that brought together industry, government, and academia. Chen is the first UMass Systems LGBTQ Chancellor. It is my honor to welcome Chancellor Julie Chen to the stage.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. Phew, for a minute there, I thought she was going to read the whole bio. So welcome, everybody. It is a great honor to have everybody here today, and it's a great honor to host Dr. Yusef Salaam here at UMass Lowell. I want to welcome Yusef and then also welcome Radha Natarajan, who is the Executive Director of the New England Innocence Project. I want to thank you in particular for coming here to share your stories and to share your thoughts and insights about our criminal justice system. I think many of the folks here know that what happened to Yusef and 4 other members of the Exonerated Five was devastating. As children, they were victims of a criminal justice system that is supposed to protect the innocent and supposed to provide a fair and equitable justice system. Instead, they lost their youth to prison because that system failed them. And for Yusef, it was nearly 7 years of his life, at an age when many of the college students in this audience are here in college. Yusef was in prison. And anyone with that experience, understandably, could be burdened by anger and bitterness. And yet Yusef has committed himself instead to spreading the light, to truth-telling, to inspiring others, and to demanding accountability. 1989, more than 30 years ago, might feel like history. But we know, if you pay attention to the news today, any day, our criminal justice system needs work. And I'm also very much proud and want to thank our faculty, Erica Gagne and Miko Wilford, for their contributions and their expertise as part of this conversation. Because it is this conversation and these types of discussions that are ways that we can start to move the ball forward. So I know this will be a fascinating discussion, and again, Yusef, we cannot thank you enough for being here. Thank you so much.
All right, are we ready to get started? I'd like to welcome Dr. Erica Gagne. This is Erica's third panel at UMass Lowell. She holds an LCSW and a PhD in social welfare. She teaches classes in crime and mental illness and created systems of issues in criminal justice. She teaches online and day classes and is a staunch advocate of social justice. Please welcome Dr. Erica Gagne to the stage to moderate our discussion today.
Okay. Welcome to the panel. Now we see you. The wrongful conviction and incarceration of Yusef Salaam. My name, as we've said, is Dr. Erica Gagne, and I'm a full-time faculty member here in the School of Criminology and Justice Studies. Social justice is a lifelong passion of mine. It is one of the principles of social work, a field that I've worked in and that has been highly influential in my life. I was raised primarily by my mother, who was also a social worker, and who taught me empathy, compassion, and to care for all people, including those who society deems unworthy and unwanted. Thus, I have always tried to help those who are demeaned, diminished, ignored, demoralized, and for one reason or another, denied access to the same opportunities that so many enjoy. According to Dr. Elie Wiesel, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. Indeed, it is my mission to never sit idly by when injustice takes place, and to refuse to be silenced when it comes to discrimination, brutality, and racism. It is my hope then that we continue to educate UMass Lowell and the greater community by way of guest speakers and panels that highlight these stories to remind us that oppression, systemic racism, and marginalization continue to occur, and that it is up to us, to all of us, to put a stop to these horrific injustices. Before we get started with the panel, I have several people to thank, so bear with me a moment. First and foremost, I want to thank the sponsors of this panel, that the Office of the Provost and the Office of Multicultural Affairs. I am incredibly grateful and truly could not have put this panel together without their support. Thank you to Julie Nash, Leslie Wong, Amy Liss, Judy Marshall, Nancy Chico, Sue Kim, Amy Gowdy-Backer, Paige Shaler, Malachi Robinson, Ilse Belito Richards, Nancy Ludwig, and Leo Rice. I also want to make sure to thank the panelists. Dr. Miko Wilford, a brilliant and compelling member of UMass Lowell, an assistant psychology professor who has been on several panels with me, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Radha Natarajan, the executive director of the New England Innocence Project, and finally Yusef Salaam, a member of the Exonerated Five, a New York Times best-selling author and award-winning motivational speaker. He is a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from former President Barack Obama, and he just announced his candidacy for councilman in New York City. I have had the honor and privilege to work with Yusef personally and professionally for the last decade, and I am humbled deeply that you are here. So thank you, and thank you all for coming to such an important event. Without further ado, we will start the panel. Okay. These first questions are for Radha. Can you tell us about the New England Innocence Project and the work that you do?
Thanks, Erica. And I'm just, first of all, really grateful to be here tonight and to be with all of you. I want to recognize two people who are here, who are part of our New England community, Steve Pina and Dennis Mayer. If both of you would stand up. These are two men who were wrongfully convicted in Massachusetts, one in Lowell, actually, and one in Boston. And it is a reminder, as it should be, that this is not a New York problem. This is not a problem that can be localized, but it is a problem that is ubiquitous and is a part of our criminal legal system. So thank you so much for being here, both of you. The New England Innocence Project, where I work and am honored to be the executive director of, we think of our mission in terms of three different, I think, buckets, or three different ways. One is to represent people who have been wrongfully convicted, to walk with them into freedom, because they have been wrongfully convicted and imprisoned. And that is, I think, the part of our work that is probably the most well-known. And we do that throughout the 6 New England states. The second part of our mission is to prevent wrongful convictions. The fact of the matter is that this is not a problem that is going away. It is not a problem that is even getting better, because it is related to sort of how we think about the criminal legal system and a number of cultural factors that I hope we'll talk about today that all of you can be a part of, that create wrongful convictions. And so it is our mission, of course, to end wrongful convictions. And I think the third part is just as important, which is to have a community to support people who have suffered long-term incarceration. That community that is led by exonerees, by people who are directly impacted, in order to make sure that when people do regain their freedom, that they can navigate this new world. And so those are what we think of as the 3 parts of our mission.
What can you tell? I guess what I would ask, based off of your question then, is what is the typical demographic of the clients that you work with?
So in New England, and in most of our cases are from Massachusetts, primarily because we've invested the most resources there, and we've been here, the longest. And the vast majority of the people who apply to us, as well as the people who are exonerated from Massachusetts, are black men, or brown men. Primarily, those cases come from Suffolk County, Hampden County. Those are the 2 of the bigger counties that there have been exonerations, as well as in Middlesex County and a few other counties that are here, Plymouth, Essex. But the vast majority do come from Suffolk County, where in murder convictions alone, it is more than 80% of the cases involve black men. I think it's even higher than that, but I don't have the exact number. But it's so significant, and when you look at the population in Massachusetts, the disparity is really quite startling.
What can you tell us about the Exoneree Network?
So the Exoneree Network was created by 3 exonerees, was founded by 3 exonerees. Victor Rosario, who was also wrongfully convicted in Lowell, Ray Champagne, who's no longer with us, but was wrongfully convicted out of Norfolk County, and Sean Ellis, who was wrongfully convicted out of Suffolk County. And the 3 of them together recognized, actually, as Dennis had for so many years before, that when people get exonerated, or when they are freed and they are awaiting their exoneration, there is nothing to support them. You might think that once someone is exonerated and there's actually an acknowledgement by the system that they have been imprisoned for decades, that the state would step up and do something, that they would support people, that they would help them with jobs or with compensation or anything to navigate what they've been through, or the trauma. But that is not the case. And so just like so many other things, we don't sit around and wait for the state to do something, right? We are empowered to do those things ourselves. And in fact, it is better, I think, that this programming and this community comes from within this group that understands what the needs are and how they should be met. And so these 3 exonerees came together to create the Exonerate Network, and together they have been pushing forward to build the infrastructure for providing healing circles, not just for the person, but also for their family members, loved ones who suffered a great deal, both while they're in prison, but also have so much to contend with once they are out. As well as there are folks who are still awaiting exoneration, and they need court support. They need all of us to stand with them as they're fighting to overturn their conviction, even though they're now in freedom. And so the Exonerate Network provides a whole host of these things, and I just think it's such a great model that should be replicated in other parts of the country.
Thank you. It is well known at this point that our system disproportionately targets marginalized and oppressed populations, while often excusing and favoring those with privilege. According to the incomparable Brian Stevenson, one of the things that pains me is that we have so tragically underestimated the trauma, the hardships we create in this country when we treat people unfairly, when we incarcerate them unfairly, and when we condemn them unfairly. Given these disparities in treatment, what can we do as educators, community members, and students to change our system for the better?
So, I think the first thing is that it's not simple, and that might be an obvious thing to say, but it's an important one, because this is not a situation where there is a Band-Aid that's going to fix the problem. This is not a situation where you can pass a law and wrongful convictions go away. I think it starts from sort of first, what the criminal legal system is, what is it doing? I think there is an importance of an interrogation by all of us in whose name this system is supposed to be, and in whose name prosecutions occur. And I think there has to be an interrogation of whether or not it is producing safety. Every single one of the people who have been exonerated, when they were arrested, when they were imprisoned, when they were sentenced, some of them to die, the community was told that they were safer. When Stephen went to prison, when Dennis went to prison, the community was told that they are now safe and they are innocent. And what this tells you is not that there are some mistakes. Of course there are mistakes, but that our whole concept of safety and danger is built on these myths, that if there is harm, that all we need to do is find someone to arrest. And who do you think they are going to arrest? People who they believe can be thrown away. People who can't fight back. People who are kids. People who they can build a case against, and the society will believe that they are dangerous. And it is those systems, it is those cultural factors of how much money we put into policing and prosecution rather than our community. It is in the ideas that we actually know how to solve crimes, and that somehow by putting someone in prison, doesn't matter who, but somebody, that we are safer. These are the things that we have to interrogate, especially as students, but as people, as citizens who pay money and who live here and deserve so much better than what we have. And so I do hope that we think about this in a way that is bigger, that is part of a movement, that actually looks at structural change and not easy solutions.
Thank you. These next questions are for Yusef Salaam. For those who may not know, or for those who simply want to hear it from you directly, can you tell us at least a little bit about your experiences as one of the Central Park Five or Exonerated Five?
Absolutely. First, I want to say, may the peace, mercy, and blessings of the owner of all peace, mercy, and blessings be upon you. At 15 years of age, almost 34 years ago, this April, will make it 34 years. At 15 years of age, the spike wheels of justice visited my home. They mowed us all down. Me, my mother, my brother, my sister. And in fact, they mowed the community down by making the people believe that we were pariahs. And by doing that, they really turned the camera towards communities of color and said these individuals are guilty because of the color of their skin and not the content of their character. In a country where you're told that you're innocent until proven guilty, Donald Trump, one of the players that rose up the ladder of political success, 2 weeks after we were accused, took out a full-page ad calling for the state to kill us. And it wasn't that it was just an ad. I mean, the ad said, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police. And it went on to say some other things, but in big, bold headlines were those words. And these words were there, I think, really to, it's almost like a nod to the darker enclaves of society. They were almost given permission to do to us what they had done to Emmett Till. My mother, I'm so thankful that she gave me the words and patterned my life in such a way that it allowed me to stand my ground before I even knew what stand my ground was. At 15, she told me that they needed me to participate in whatever it was they were trying to do. Do not participate, she urged me. Refuse. And so the Central Park jogger case essentially became a kind of anomaly in the system where people were able to say after, well, we just got it wrong once. This is not business as usual. This is not how we operate as a criminal justice system. Matter of fact, if you heard me correct, you could almost discern what's at stake. A criminal justice system. I call it the criminal system of justice for more clarity. But ultimately, what they were saying, and I'm trying to answer this in a kind of overview, broader way. What they were saying to me was that I was born a mistake. Matter of fact, they didn't just say this to me, they wanted me to believe this definition that they were giving me. Because if I took that definition, if I internalized the definition that I was born a mistake, then everything that I was to do, the pattern that I would pattern my family and my life after, would be that they too were born mistakes. That they cannot aspire to be anything other than living below the net line. That the greatest aspirations they have and should have is to be living in the margins of life. This is what they want. And by the grace of God, I was able to transform the prism into a place that it no longer became the prison industrial complex, but for me it became the womb of America. I was able to look at it and look really at it from a different angle and realize that this thing that they wanted to happen to me was actually happening for me. Because they had a plan. Their plan was to continue racism by another name. Their plan was to continue white supremacy, white male dominance by another name. Their plan was to ensure that I would never, in a Sankofa way, reach back and get what it was that I needed, not just to survive in the margins, but to thrive. And as we heard, many say, man plans and God plans. Surely God is the best of planners. And so what happened to me is the story that happened to so many. I thought I was the only one. I thought when I met people in prison and they told me that they were in there for crimes that they hadn't committed, I thought I really was the only one. I thought they were just trying to connect with me in that moment. And then when I came home from prison, and really I resigned my life to being one of those individuals, unfortunately, one of them by the spikes of justice. I had already said to myself, well, I guess I gotta hide in plain sight. Not make too much noise, not do too much, just try to go along to get along. And then I remembered that my mother told me that they needed me to participate. So I had to take those words into the prison and survive. I had to take those words out of the prison and use it to survive as well. And then I had to take that into the world. As I began to reevaluate and reorient what this thing called living is. See, I didn't get the chance yet to hear the words of the great philosopher Cardi B. She said, y'all heard it. I mean, I'm sure y'all heard it. She said, knock me down 9 times, I'll get up 10. My good friend Les Brown said, you know, Yusef, it's not a matter of if you fall in life. But he said, when you fall, try to land on your back. Because if you can look up, you can get up. But if you land on your face and you realize that you're still in the game, turn over, regroup, and get back up. Keep getting back up. Because they're counting on you to participate in your own demise. So what happened to me is not uncommon in the black and brown community, where they want you to believe, for one, that that individual over there is guilty, and you somehow escaped. But yet still the black and brown community believes that they're going to be dead or in jail before they reach the age of 21. None of us have ever planned that for our lives. But yet that seed has been made to blossom and grow. And it's on us. Because that seed needs us to water it. And the beautiful thing about my story is that my story was for me. Like for years, I was trying to understand, why was it that this happened to me? I knew that everything that happens to you, like God doesn't put more on you than you can bear. I knew that. But I still wanted to understand, like, you know, I hadn't yet come to the point of announcing my candidacy. I've never even thought about becoming a political person. Then I heard the words of a prophet named Joseph in the Quran, a prophet named Yusef in the Bible. Same person, same story. A young man who before, like this is, you know, you think about sacred time, sometimes we think right now, we living in a time where it's all, this is it. Especially young people. Young people coin terms like YOLO. And it's like one of the most truest terms ever. But when they see things like what happened in Michigan, or what just happened in Buffalo, wrapped in their terminology is that we have to live in a state of hopelessness. So don't plan for the future. Spend that check and get it right back. Actually, most of the time, the check don't come back. You know, there was music in the messages back in the days, and there was always a message in the music. And so all of that happened to me. And I think the beautiful thing is that I was able to hold on long enough to faith to understand why, so that I could begin to live, as Nietzsche says, the how. I needed to see what that why was. Like, why was I chosen for this? I was chosen because I needed to know that I could survive. I needed to, like, for myself. And once I got that, I was chosen because I needed to be the example for other people who look like me, who are looking to me to know that they too, if I went to the belly of the beast, and I can call it the womb of America, if I look at the Central Park jogger case and now I can say it's a love story between God and his people, like, we can get through anything. And it's not because of me, but it's because in our DNA, in the deoxyribonucleic acid pulsing through our body, is the truth. That truth, that's that quote for truth that says that you weren't brought here slaves. Impossible. That Barack Obama can't be the bar. Like, that's the standard of excellence. That's the norm. But we've been made to believe that we have to live below the net line. And so my story, interestingly enough, blew up right in their face. They never, I mean, think about this. Like, I came home, like my good brothers, you know, who are home now. I came home, and I remember going to a store to get a suit, to go get a job interview. And the guy who looked like me saw me walk over the threshold in the store, sized me up and said, 44 long, right? I said, oh, shucks, yeah. Come on in the back, young blood, I got a suit for you. He slides the jacket over my shoulders, I put it on and I'm checking it out and I'm like, it's not bad. I said, who made it? And I swear it was a moment like that pause that y'all heard. It was a moment just like that, like Neo in the Matrix. Like, I was looking, like, I looked at the guy and I swear it was like time stood still. The guy, he grabbed the lapels of his jacket and he cleared his throat. I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. He said, that's a Donald Trump suit. It's funny now. You know, I threw that jacket on so fast, the thought it was on fire. But I mean, this is like the stuff, this is it. To be able to take the lemons life gave you and make lemonade. To be able to know that forgiveness is for you and not for them. You can't come in with all of the hurt and pain, the anger, the bitterness, because it'll destroy you. And so the Central Park jogger case, yes, it happened to 5 young men, wrongfully, 34 years ago almost. The system believed that we did it. As a matter of fact, when we came home, they said, we'll see you later. And here we are.
Yusef, in the New York Times best-selling book, Punching the Air, the defendant in the book, upon hearing the words guilty states, There's a stone in my throat. There's a brick on my chest. The stone turns into a mountain. The brick turns into a building, and it feels like a giant, heavy thing, like the whole world is pressing down on me. Does this description capture how you felt when you were wrongfully found guilty?
Absolutely. You know, those of us that know, like, first of all, my mother wasn't even allowed to be in the courtroom because she wasn't going down without a fight. She was speaking out. She was, she was using her body to let the judge know that this was not just wrong. This was the most unjust of justice. I was going back and forth. I mean, I gotta tell it this way. I was going back and forth to court because I was on bail. I was going back and forth like it was a job. Put my suit on, hop on the train, go to court, come back, take my suit off, hang out with the fellas, try to have a normal life. Somebody came running down the hallway. I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and they came running down the hallway, and they said they got a verdict. And I swear to you, even though I was arrested for a crime I didn't commit, because I was on bail, I believed that the system would figure out we didn't do it. I, in fact, told my friend, I said, look, they got the verdict, I'll see you soon. Thinking they're gonna see that we didn't do this. I came back in the courtroom, and because they had split the case in half, I was on trial with Antron, Raymond, and myself. Corey, Kevin, and Stephen Lopez were to go next. They told Antron to stand. They read the verdicts. The first one came back not guilty. Everybody breathed a sigh of relief. The next one came back guilty. The next one came back guilty. The next one came back guilty. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I hope he can keep his head up. Because I just knew I was going home. Yusef Salaam, please stand. They asked the bailiff, how do you find? Just like Antron. Count one, not guilty. How do you find on rape? Guilty. How do you find on guilty? Guilty. 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 That word began to echo so many times in the courtroom I lost count. My mother wasn't there. If you got the complexion for acceptance, sometimes they give you the option. The option. I mean, movies actually portray what happens in real life. Sometimes the judge is up there and he says, "Okay, young man, listen. How about you come back in a month? 2 months. 2 months. Go home, prepare, but don't have us come looking for you now. Got to do this time." They told us to stand, to put our hands behind our backs. They arrested us over again and led us to the back. And when I tell you we cried, I can only describe what I felt like. I can only understand how I felt when I went to Africa in 2018. And I'm sitting on Goree Island. And I'm just looking at myself in my camera. I got it on selfie, and I'm not really sure if I want to take a video or if I want to say anything. I'm just looking at myself, and then right behind me, I see a woman passing her child back through the door of no return. It felt like I was being placed in slavery. It felt like I was being kidnapped from my home. That mountain to swallow. Like this story, the story of hope being placed in prison. That's what a mom means. A mom means hope. They put hope in prison. This was supposed to be my story. But because I was doing the film with Netflix and Ava, I couldn't tell my story at the time. So I took the kaleidoscope of the people that I've met in prison and began to tell their story and shape what was going on with them. But it's one of those things where you just want it to stop. Like you want it to be over. You want the awful feeling to go over. You want to wake up back believing in the American dream. You were awakened to the American nightmare. That's what that felt like. Yeah.
I don't know how much everybody knows about Yusef, but he does have 10 children. And I tell you this only because it goes with my next question, which is how important, well, first of all, how much do your children know? And how important is it to you for them to know your story and the stories of others who have been mistreated by our system?
Yeah, they know my story very well. As a matter of fact, my son, who was born on my birthday, which will be in 11 days. It's no longer my birthday, it's his birthday. But it's so funny because my son, who's born on my birthday, when he began to understand what this story was, this legacy that he'd been born into, it's so funny because like his story, the way he tells it, he said, Donald Trump put my dad in jail. He escaped and met my mom at Starbucks. And we like, no, that's not quite how it happened. But my children, you know, the eldest of them, they remember what it was like before before the city shifted. Like there was a tremendous amount of hate that was being pushed our way. You know, we were told in many ways that, first of all, we were sent, many of us, I think all of the now known Exonerated Five, we were sent hate mail. And some of the hate mail was saying things like, you know, your son doesn't deserve to live and neither do you. Talking about my mom. And so I used to shelter my children from just even knowing in a full way what it was that I had went through. But having 10 children, and though, you know, there's some who have already adulted, or they're still adulted because, you know, hey dad, I need some money. Hey, how much? You know, I'm just thankful that I can provide, you know. But they know my story in such a profound way that for them, they're on the other side. They're on the happy side. They're on the celebrated side. You know, like I go places and people run up to me and, wow, can I take a photo of you, Yusef Salaam? And I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem, you know? And it's funny because I don't feel like I'm a celebrity. I've never felt like I was a celebrity. I'm celebrated in community, but I feel like I'm just a person who survived, who was given tools while they were in the dark to produce light. Because that's what we need. We need more light in the world so that the thing that we're really fighting against, which is spiritual wickedness in high and low places, will be dismantled. Because the systems that we are fighting against to give us equity, to give us equality, to be able to balance things out, to undergird communities where they have divested everything. And we still survive. But those communities, those systems rather, are made up of people. And those people, if they found purpose in the same way that Dr. King mentioned purpose, then they should be doing their work as if God himself called them to do it at that moment. And that work should be a righteous work. There should be no bad cops. We should see righteous policing everywhere. Because on the side of cop cars, you see the words to serve and protect. In New York, it goes a step above and beyond. It says courtesy, professionalism, and respect. I'm sure Tyree Nichols wanted his life to be served and protected. And just like Erica Gagne, when he was being choked to death, they didn't even give him the first letters off of the cop car. They didn't give him CPR. And so my children, they get the opportunity to, in many ways, and this is like this is the challenge, right? Because children sometimes say, Dad don't know, like they don't know what it's like to be a child. But I can show them, like my story is so well known that my children are looking at the baby photos and like my son, he's like, that's me. And I'm like, actually, no, that's me. When I was about 4 months old or something like that. But it's a beautiful thing to be placed in a moment on a page in the chapter of history of now. Because that moment is the same moment that we all have. And so like I tell my children, you don't have the luxury of saying tomorrow or I'll get to that later. I mean, every one of us wants to do that, but the wealthiest place is not in Africa where there's gold and diamonds, nor is it in the Middle East where there's oil. The wealthiest place in the world is the graveyard. It's the place where people put their hopes and dreams and aspirations, which was inside of themselves, and they said, someday I'll get to that. Someday I'll write that book. Someday I will produce that, whatever it is that came to you. And it's on you to take that someday and make it now. To literally like project yourself into the past, present, future tense of self, so that you can begin to do what it is that you're supposed to do, so that when you come to the end of your life, you can die empty because you gave it all. And that's part of the challenge, right? Those of us who've been incarcerated, they arrested our development. And if you were young enough to not even know what it was that you wanted to be, you come home almost a decade later, you come home 2 decades later, 3 decades later, your whole life is altered. But you've been placed at this moment in time for a reason. And that's the best part about it, right? And that's for the 10 children. You know, the good book said, be fruitful and multiply. Y'all know I was in prison, I'm just doing my part.
What do you think is the biggest lesson or the most important lesson for them to learn from your experience? What is the takeaway for them?
The biggest lesson is that, I think Anne Frank said it, right? Anne Frank said it's not what happens to you, but what happens inside of you that makes all the difference. Because even Nelson Mandela, our hero, he said to be angry and bitter, like he said he had to leave that in the prison. Because if he took the anger and bitterness out with him, it would destroy him. And he's known to have said to be angry and bitter is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. But Dr. Maya Angelou gave us a way to really turn our lives into, make us all alchemists. She said you should be angry, but you must not be bitter. Reminding us that bitterness is like a cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. And then she teaches us the secret, the alchemy. She said, use that anchor. You dance it. You march it. You vote it. You do everything about it, she said. Then she said, you talk it. Never stop talking it. How many men don't talk? We keep it inside. How many of us don't realize that shaking it off gives us the ability to keep standing? So Dr. Maya Angelou says, you dance it. Like I was looking at my son dancing the other day, and I said, I don't know what he doing. He said, look, Dad, I'm getting sturdy. I said, okay. But voting it as well, right? That secret weapon, that power that we're told not to participate in. And by not participating, we actually are participating. Because non-participation is participation. Because they're going to vote. They're going to make sure, because see, the whole system operates because of that. And so I think the biggest lesson is that it's not what happens to you, but what happens inside of you. Because if you know, like I know, if you know that life is going to knock you down, so just like Cardi B said, get back up. If you know that, then you have to know that every single one of us who wants to be diamonds has to be placed under tremendous pressure. And the only way to survive life is by surviving. Because every one of us were born on purpose. And this is really my message I tell my children all the time. Every single one of us was born on purpose. And Les Brown gave me a beautiful way to clean it up for all audiences. He said, the way we can prove it, Yusef, is that when your mother and father got together, you was one of over 400 million options. And you made it. Like you made it. There's purpose in that. There's intentionality in that. There was no mistake in you being here. And so for the system to say it's black against white, no, it's spiritual wickedness in high and low places that we're fighting against. For the system to say you better than them, nobody's better than you, and you are not better than anyone, but you got to know that you are the best. Because if you believe that there's someone better than you, you will always play second chance, second fiddle, as they say. That means that as we move forward, we can get further together in unity than we can trying to be apart. And so the lesson that I'm trying to impart to the eldest and the youngest of all of the children is to live full. Don't think that if your father got a few dollars in his pocket, like I'm not Shaq, right? Shaq said, no, I'm rich, I'm broke, right? You know, that's the reality. Like, you gotta get it. You gotta know that you were born here on purpose, and you gotta dig deep and get it. Because never in this time has there been these kind of people. Like when George Floyd was murdered, they were asking every activist, including myself, what can we do? And I was like, I just kind of tuned out from wanting to say anything. And I was listening, I was waiting, I was listening. And then our ancestors' wildest dreams poured out into the streets. And they coined new terminology. They coined new ideas. They coined ways to identify that this system is created in the minds. This system, first of all, is not broken. This system is operating exactly as it was designed in the minds of the people who created it. And so it's all of that, because it's challenging, right? They have to be able to figure out how to position themselves. Because when they look at me, I'm I'm moving on, like I am physically moving on purpose. I'm reaching out to seek the guidance that's needed in order to be one of those who stands and is counted today. But they have to be able to do the same thing. I can't hold, like, I'm holding their hands and I'm trying to put the pattern in their lives, just like my mother put the pattern in my life. Because at some point, they're gonna have to go out of the nest. That might mean that you're gonna have to send them to the grocery store one day and say, hey, listen, go get some milk from the store. And you need them to know that they gotta stay on point. Because you're gonna see them in a few minutes, come back with the milk. You don't want it to be a sad story where something tragic happens. It's like that young man that went to the store to get a birthday cake for his daughter. Police shot him in the face. So now his daughter's birthday is also her dad's death day. That's a tragedy.
In an interview, you're quoted as saying, "In the spirit of Dr. King, I choose love, because hate is too much a burden to bear, but my eyes are wide open." How hard do you feel it is to choose love after everything that has happened?
It is a challenge, but it gets easier. Like if I could look at the Central Park jogger case, I didn't say the whole thing, but in my memoir I talk about it. I say the Central Park jogger case is actually a love story between God and his people. It's a story of a criminal system of injustice placed on trial in order to produce a miracle in modern time. It's a story of a people who have been buried alive and forgotten. The system forgot you as seeds. And instead of a social death, we've been able to emerge like the phoenix from the ashes. Because as they built the fire to consume us, they forgot the owner of the heat. And so the challenge of not becoming angered and hateful is the challenge of maintaining control over your mind. And it's like a simple thing, right? The most smallest, frailest looking woman or male can flip the biggest person in here. I've seen it, like in martial arts. Get somebody teaching jujitsu, they'll flip. Don't mess with that person, they got something with them. But the secret is that wherever your mind goes, your body follows. And so the challenge is, how do we keep ourselves emotionally steady and level enough so that we can think our way out of things? Because if systemically they've studied you, they've determined that they can press your buttons, and then when they turn on the camera, they'll call you crazy. And the people watching, because we forgot Newton's third law of motion, the people watching say, man, that person is crazy. Newton's third law of motion states that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when people are reacting to an action and they turn the camera on, that's one of the reasons why we always, like the oversight committees, it's important for people to be able to see, can I see the body camera footage? Because you telling me you had to put this person down, but this person looked like me. And you telling me you captured Dylan Roof alive? Now I'm not saying Dylan Roof should have been put down. But I'm saying this young man went into a church, prayed with the parishioners, and then ended up killing someone and was captured alive. I think, was that the one that they took to McDonald's and got him a stranger than fiction?
Okay, these next questions are for Dr. Wilford. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
So the first thing I'm going to say is I wish I had Yusef's immune system because 3 kids managed to get me sick quite frequently. So I apologize for sounding a bit like a Dr. Frog today. But I do work on the intersection of psychological phenomena with real-world systems, primarily the legal system. So a lot of my work examines ways in which we could reduce the number of wrongful convictions by simply changing the procedures that we use to recognize systematic biases or times at which people's memories are more likely to fail, things that are more likely to result in suboptimal decision-making, etc. So most of my work has focused on ways of improving the ways in which we question eyewitnesses or ask them to identify people that they believe who might have committed crimes in ways that reduce the likelihood that they'll make wrongful identifications or produce details that didn't actually happen. I also do a lot of work on factors that influence decision-making in legal contexts. Primarily, a lot of people aren't aware because you get so many of these great crime dramas on TV now where you always have a courtroom, you always have a judge, you have 2 very adversarial attorneys, and you have typically a very dramatic trial scene. Most people don't realize that trials are now the exception to our legal system. The vast majority of criminal convictions in this country are the result of a defendant pleading guilty to something. And what's fascinating about that is as plea convictions have risen, we've also noted an increasing number of demonstrable false guilty pleas, of cases where we now know a defendant was completely innocent and yet still in a courtroom in front of a judge admitted guilt for a crime that we know that they had no responsibility for. And when you start looking at these plea convictions, it becomes less and less surprising that an innocent person would do that, because the amount of power that the state can wield in these cases to influence someone to plead guilty is enormous, and it really makes you wonder sort of where those constitutional rights are, that right to an impartial jury, that right, most importantly, to not be penalized for exercising your constitutional rights, and yet you see cases where people are absolutely being punished for exercising their constitutional right to a trial. One of the cases that I find the most compelling was a case involving this guy named Weldon Angelos, who was accused by a police informant of dealing drugs to him on 3 occasions while in possession of a gun, which is a mandatory minimum crime. So 3 counts of gun possession during a drug trafficking crime means a mandatory minimum sentence of 55 years. 55 years. And I want to stress, this informant did not claim that Angelos brandished the weapon, threatened him with the weapon, even pointed to the weapon during the transaction, just claimed that at the first instance, he had it in his car, and the subsequent instances, he had it in an ankle holster. So the prosecutor in the case basically was able, because prosecutors have unilateral charging discretion in this country, was able to offer Mr. Angelos a plea of 15 years in prison. We'll only charge you with the first count of gun possession during a drug trafficking crime, and then we'll charge you with 10 years for the drug trafficking itself. That's a 40-year sentence difference. Just if Mr. Angelos had the audacity to exercise his constitutional right, your constitutional right to a trial. He rejected that plea and he was sentenced to 55 years in prison for drug trafficking of marijuana while allegedly in possession of a gun. The judge who sentenced him wrote a lengthy opinion in which he himself said, as a judge, I am sentencing a man to a sentence he does not deserve, and compared his sentence to the sentences of violent criminals, someone involved in 3 pay-for-hire murder schemes, someone who hijacked an airplane, a child rapist. All of these individuals got less time in prison than Mr. Angelos got for the crime of taking his case to trial. So I've been doing an increasing amount of work looking at how can we improve this system? Because unfortunately, I don't think there's a way to do away with guilty plea convictions in this country because we have become so reliant on them. But how can we at least try to make them so that any rational, innocent person, when offered that sort of deal, is going to feel compelled to take it? So.
Are defendant confessions ever truly reliable, and how much do bias and stereotypes play into false confessions?
I do think defendant confessions can be reliable. I think you see a lot of the earmarks of a reliable defendant confession actually in the case of Mateus Reyes, the individual who actually committed the rape against this poor woman in Central Park in 1989. And those earmarks would be that initially he said he came forward out of clear motivation of guilt. He volunteered himself to law enforcement. He was able to provide what we call intimate knowledge of the crime, right? Details that someone couldn't know unless they were there or they were closely involved in the investigation itself. He was not subjected to any coercive tactics. He was an adult at the time. He was questioned in a low-pressure environment. Situations like that can lead to at least more reliable confessions, but of course, as with many things, these things always exist on a continuum. I think the most important thing, getting back to your question of bias, is that Mateus Reyes was questioned by people who didn't presume he was guilty because they thought they already had the guilty individuals. And this is the issue, is when certain individuals are questioned by people who think they already know the answer they're looking for, it can be a huge problem. And absolutely subjective biases, racism, all of those things are going to come into play, and they're going to contribute to investigators having what we call forensic confirmation bias, where they're just looking for evidence to prove what they think they already know, and that's absolutely what happened in this case. They knew the answer they wanted Yusef and the other 4 of the Exonerated Five to give, and they weren't going to give up until they got that answer because they already believed they were right. And when you have those sort of guilt presumptive procedures, how you can call yourself investigators anymore is beyond me. They weren't investigating anything when they questioned Yusef and the other 4. They were looking for them to say what they wanted them to say. There was no investigation. It was, we're going to pressure you, we're going to deprive you of sleep, of talking to your parents, of giving you food until you give us the answer that we want to hear.
Are there scientifically supported methods of interviewing eyewitnesses and asking them to confess? And do these methods reduce the likelihood of wrongful convictions?
There are actually. So there's a method that's been widely adopted in a number of European countries that's called the PEACE method. PEACE is an acronym. I'm not going to attempt to recall what it stands for because I would recall it incorrectly. But essentially it is a non-accusatorial method of questioning someone that you think might or might not have been involved in a crime. And it's characterized as a non-accusatorial method because it is specifically aimed more at information gathering purposes, which again, theoretically is what investigators should be charged with. They should be investigating the situation and not presuming they know the answers. So the techniques that really guide the PEACE method come from this idea that our obligation is to gather information. So we shouldn't be presuming that we already know the correct conclusion to this procedure. We should be trying to get as much information as possible. So the PEACE method is really designed around this idea that we as investigators should be attempting to get information from someone. And you would be surprised at the ease with which you can get a guilty person to incriminate themselves simply by asking them what happened. Because if they are in fact guilty and don't want you to know that they're guilty, they're going to have to lie to answer that question. And what research has shown is that lying is actually a fairly cognitively demanding process. So if you just ask them what happened and sort of ask them from different angles, right? So there's a strategy where you can try and ask them what happened in reverse order. You can strategically reveal evidence that you have. There are a number of things that you can do in an information gathering context to manage to trap someone in a lie when they are in fact lying.
Are there steps in the legal process for which these empirically supported are particularly critical?
So I think, I think scientifically supported procedures are important at every phase of an investigation. But I think they're particularly important when you're dealing with vulnerable populations, which, again, the Exonerated Five unquestionably would have fallen under many classifications of vulnerable populations, the most evident one being that they were all children when they were questioned for hours without parents present. And the fact that that was intentionally done should frankly make people's, I'll quote from the Making a Murderer judge, the initial panel that tried to say that Brandon Dassey's confession should be considered inadmissible, right? Where the judge said, watching this interrogation made my skin crawl, right? When you are questioning a juvenile, when you are questioning a child, you need to be so careful as to what you're saying, how you're saying it, tone, suggestion, anything. Children are the most vulnerable members of our society, and the way in which Yusef and the other 4 suspects in this case were questioned, we should all be ashamed of that. It makes your skin crawl to see the way in which children were being treated in this process. So yes, I think scientifically supported procedures always, but especially when dealing with vulnerable populations. And this wasn't the case for Yusef, but I think for Corey as well, when there's developmental or intellectual disabilities that are going to slow your comprehension of these procedures. Again, that increases your vulnerability and makes it even more important that you are being careful about how you're administering these procedures.
Were there any other factors involved in Yusef's case that you would like to comment on?
Yeah, so there's actually, there was one factor here that I would also really like Radha's input on, because, so I rewatched the Central Park 5 documentary that Ken Burns and his family members, I believe, assisted with. And I also watched the Netflix dramatic When They See Us series. And I continue to be perplexed by why this victim, who undeniably was a victim of an absolutely horrible, atrocious, terrible crime, but why she testified when she, by her own admission, by her doctor's admission, had no memory of the crime itself. Because although that testimony is powerful, because everyone in that room has to hear the terrible things that were done to this woman, the terrible life-changing results of this attack, she had no memory of the event itself, so there was no information she could provide about who actually did this to her. All she could do was be a powerful reminder of how important it is for us to feel safe again. And we have obvious people that we can say, if we put these people in prison, we'll be safe again. I cannot fathom what the justification was for discerning that her testimony was going to have any probative value when she herself said she had no memory of the event. And I think this is yet another, exactly what Radha said. There is no simple solution to this. And every case you encounter new things where you think, how is this allowed? And how do you fix that? You could try and say, we'll just change the law this way and we'll change the law that way. And you would never get to all of these systematic issues. But the fact that this woman was allowed to testify about what happened to her, right? She staggers into the courtroom because she still doesn't have a full ability to walk because of the severity of the attack. She needs help getting to the witness stand. Her speech is obviously impaired. They pull out exhibits of the clothes she was wearing and make her say, yes, that's the clothing I was. None of this has probative value. None of it is her saying, yes, I remember who attacked me and it was that person right there. Because she had no memory of the event. Again, it's just so theatrical. That's what it is. It's theater. And why theater was allowed in this courtroom is beyond my comprehension. Because again, the bar for evidence to be admitted in a courtroom at a trial is supposed to be whether it has more probative than prejudicial value, theoretically, and Radha, I'm sure, can correct me if I'm wrong. What probative value does a woman who has no memory of the crime have? All she can offer is prejudice, in the sense that, again, her existence, a reminder of how terrible this crime was, just motivates the jury to want closure, or the appearance of closure. But yeah, I'd be interested. I have another thing I want to address too, but I'd be interested in Radha's comments on that.
I mean, I think the first thing, I think you already know this, but I think it's worth saying, is that, legal rules like that, more prejudicial than probative, any of these legal rules, they're moving targets. They're applied for some people, they're not applied for other people, they are ignored. If you are looking at the law to guide what is going to happen, you're going to miss what's actually going to happen, because it's not based on the rules. It's based on the outcome. It's based on the emotion. It's based on the people. And the importance of the emotional value for the purpose of the prosecution in this case, to have her come in and make the jury feel that there is no other option for safety of this community than to convict the people, that it's not her memory. The entire system is built on deference to police officers and prosecutors. So it's not her memory that matters. It is that we trust, even though there are so many reasons not to trust, but we trust police officers to get to the truth. But the reality of it is that in each of these cases, we all want an answer, right? And there's these things of like, okay, so you can do an interrogation to get to an answer. You can do an eyewitness procedure to get to an answer. But in order to get, sometimes you can't actually get to the answer. First of all, that's one thing. You can't solve every crime. So that's bottom line. We have to accept that. And second, the more pressure we put on people who don't have the tools to actually get to the answers, the more likely we're going to get an answer, but it's not going to be the true answer. And so they have to close the case, and they have to get this conviction, because there's no other option. There's nobody else waiting in the wings for them to convict, right? There's nobody else. They have built their entire narrative on the guilt of the people that they chose, that they forced to make statements against themselves to participate in the process. And what happens if they're found not guilty? Then that is an indictment on them and on that entire system. So to make the jury know, you're doing this for this woman. If you convict them, it is justice for her. That's what that's about. It has nothing to do with legal rules. The legal rules make you think that you have some control over what's happening. And I'm a lawyer, just to be clear. I've been a lawyer for 20 years, working in the courts with these rules. So I know them quite well, both how they function and also how they don't function. And so if you're looking at the rules, you're missing what's the outcome that people are trying to get to. And it really falls down to the deference to prosecutors and police to keep us safe. And once we think about that and critique that, interrogate that, that I think leads to a lot more understanding of why. Why is it let in even though it's not reliable? Why is this happening even though the law says to do something different? It answers those why questions because it's working as the system intended, not because it's broken. That's that is like the critical, piece of this, the foundation that we have to accept.
Yeah. So what I would add to this is, I agree with everything Radha said. obviously how she put it was a lot better than I could have, but I just think it's so interesting, the subjectivity of this probative prejudicial line. And of course, this subjectivity of it is where we let in all the biases, as you know, the whole reason this event is part of Social Justice Week, because the more subjective these things are allowed to be, the more that people are allowed to let their personal prejudicial biases permeate the system and say, no, I'm not doing it because I'm racist, I'm not doing it because this defendant is black, I'm doing it because I'm allowed this discretion, and in this case, I think this is the right decision to make. But the other piece of theatrics that I'll just bring attention to, so I also do eyewitness memory research, and thankfully, there is finally a consensus among the eyewitness memory research community that in-court identification should not be permitted ever, even if you had a reliable witness who made a solid identification out of court. They shouldn't be allowed to then reiterate that identification in court, because I'm gonna ask you all a question. If I'm an attorney and I am questioning a witness and I say, is that person you identified in court here today? What is the witness gonna say? Any guesses? Everybody knows the witness is gonna say yes, and everybody knows the attorney is gonna say, can you point to that person? And everybody knows they're gonna point to the defendant. So how is this at all a probative procedure when literally everyone in the courtroom knows the answer? There is no probative value of an in-court identification. You didn't witness the crime. You could know nothing about the crime. You could cut into the trial at that exact moment and still guess with absolute certainty, oh, the witness is gonna point at that person because they're sitting in the defendant box. That is not at all a probative procedure, and yet we allow it in progressive jurisdictions and conservative jurisdictions. You know, if they made a reliable out-of-court identification, they should be allowed to make an in-court identification. Why? Theater and deference, exactly, yes. Anyway, the other element that I'll quickly comment on in this case was that Yusef and his two co-defendants for the initial trial were offered a plea, interestingly, during the trial, if I'm correct, and if that was accurately represented, and didn't take it. But, which of course again makes them the exception. I mean, it's exceptional to not cave to the pressure of accepting a plea deal. And while I think it's great that there's attention brought to that, I want to again stress that that is exceptional, and that a lot of even innocent people faced with those same circumstances would have accepted a plea in that scenario. But what I thought was interesting in this case is that they were all told they all had to accept the plea or it would be off the table. And again, this is yet another thing I don't understand how this is legal, because in multiple defendant trials, jurors are clearly instructed. They're not capable of following this instruction, but they're at least clearly instructed, right? So you have the illusion of, even though this is a multiple defendant trial, you should be treating each defendant separately, you should be arriving at independent verdicts, you should be making your decisions totally separate of the other defendants. Again, people are not capable of this, but at least it's providing an illusion of this is a fair trial for each defendant, even though we're combining them. And yet somehow, when you go to plea negotiations, you're allowed to just say, no, in a plea negotiation context, it's an all or nothing thing. We're not gonna treat you as individual defendants. We're gonna tell you, you either all take this or none of you get it. And again, in Yusef's case, they chose not to take it. But I thought it's so interesting because it has a good corollary with another case that got a lot of media attention, the West Memphis 3 case, where they were also given a take it or leave it, all of you plea. And what's particularly troubling about that case is one of the defendants was on death row, and the other two were very aware that he was on death row, and that if they didn't take this plea, and he wanted to understandably get off of death row, then he would not be afforded the opportunity to do so because it was a take it or leave it plea. So all three of them took another very interesting legal system invention called an Alford plea, which allows them to maintain their innocence while accepting a plea conviction. So let me be clear, there is not a jury verdict or a guilty plea that convicts them of this crime. There's their signature on a piece of paper saying, we don't want to roll the dice because we have no faith in the system whatsoever anymore. So we're accepting the parameters of this offer, but we're not admitting guilt. In fact, we're publicly maintaining our innocence of this crime. And again, they all felt compelled to do that because this is the West Memphis 3 case. Damien Eccles was on death row, and if not for this plea, he would likely still be on death row. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, your expertise, and your recommendation with us. We'd like to offer the audience a brief Q&A. There are going to be 2 microphones going around in the back. There's Malachi and Maria. If you have a question and you are able, please raise your hand and they will come to you. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Yusef, I wanted to start by saying that you are like one of my heroes as a Muslim woman, as a child of an incarcerated parent. I just look up to you so much. I think that you are so strong. My question to you is about like this idea of like innocence versus guilt. So I know that like a lot of the times within like the sentencing community, there's this idea of like some people deserve to be incarcerated, other people who are innocent deserve to be freed. I'm wondering if your time incarcerated changed your perception about how we treat the people who are guilty, who are inside of the system. If that makes sense as a question.
Absolutely. So, I guess I gotta answer it from this perspective, although acknowledging the other side. Scientifically, they've said that a child's brain is not fully developed until they're in their 20s. And then if you put that same scientific measure on a male child, then it's like 27. I was in prison with young men in the youth facility, maximum age security facility. Some of them had time like 9 years to life. And it's one of those things where you realize that because of the color of your skin, you're not afforded the opportunity for grace and mercy. You're not given the opportunity to say, you know, we're going to give you a second chance or a third chance or things like that. And the other side, too, is about the fact that communities have been divested of any type of support. And so when you look at something that is depleting your life force, you're filled with so much despair. Like that term I said earlier that young people coin, YOLO, that term is filled with don't plan for the future, spend all your money, it's not worth it, do everything you want to do, smoke it all, drink it all, whatever. But if you do that for 5 years and you're still here, you just ruined your life. You do that for 10 years, you're still here, oh man. If you've done that and continue to do that, it is disastrous. Systemically, and we're talking about the criminal justice system, or the criminal legal system, I have to acknowledge that that system is made up of also the peripheral systems that control society. And things like no taxation without representation plays a major role in that. Because if you have tax-paying citizens who have not been taught, and you know, it occurred to me as you all were speaking, that my mother said to me, she said, they don't teach civics in school anymore. So the average person has no idea what their civil rights are, what their regular rights. They don't even know how the system moves and operates and works outside of a basic knowledge that they said the bus is reliable, I should be able to get on the bus and get to work at such and such a time with the train or whatever it is. And the truth of the matter is that all of these systems are supposed to be working together, but they're working towards equity to allow for your tax dollars to ensure that you receive the fair share, that you're provided opportunity, that you're given all that you need. And the reality is that that's not what's happening. And so when it comes to the criminal justice system, or the criminal legal system, or like I like to call it, the criminal system of justice, we have so much more that we have to overcome. Because in America, if we look at films like Where to Invade Next by Michael Moore, this film examined other countries' legal systems. You know, in America, here we are, those of us who came here as a part of immigration and not as a part of being put in the bottom of slave ships, of ships and then turned into slaves. They came from somewhere, like everybody came from somewhere. And those systems from which they came, according to this film, humanize. They're the worst of their people. So that if they commit a wrong, they get the opportunity to pay for their crime. So that when they finish paying for their crime, they come back a whole human being, not broken. Well, broken because of that, but at least they don't get penalized twice. Where you're out here after doing time, and now the system says now you're going to be given a social debt. And so that's the challenge. So a lot of my thinking is really predicated on the fact that I went through the awful experience of going to prison. But then what I saw there, how I understood the system to work, the services that were provided or not provided, the experiments that were done on the inmates as it comes to things like medical care and things of that nature. You know, when COVID happened in the world, it was a disaster. In prisons, it was a bomb that went off. You know,
Hello, my name's Maddie. I just have a question for anyone that wants to answer. I was wondering how you would recommend someone like that recognizes their white privilege, how they can help the criminal justice system and help, like, I don't know how to explain it, like fight for everyone and recognize their privilege and use it to be powerful. Thank you.
Can donate to the New England Innocence Project.
You know what? I love that. I love that answer. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because I kept, like, as she was speaking, I said, damn, hold up, like, what can they do, right? But it occurred to me that there are those of us who get the opportunity to only look out of the window of life. And there are others who get the opportunity to look in the mirror. And when you look in the mirror and life reflects you, you get the opportunity to feel good about yourself, to move with purpose, to feel like you belong. So psychosocially, you can know that you matter. Whereas those of us who look out the window, unless they have been given and really gifted a strong sense of who they are, they just continue to look out of the window. There is so much resources that are needed to fight unjust systems that it's not enough to talk about it. If you have a huge platform on social media, definitely use that as well. But using dollars when the system is taking our tax dollars and using it against us, it's so important. So when you said that donate to the Innocence Project, the New England Innocence Project, it becomes so much more impactful. Because when you talk about the fact that you have to find cases that have been purposefully buried, where people have to be paid in order to find where these things are. Like three-card Molly, I don't know if y'all know what three-card. You don't know what three-card Molly? So some of y'all are looking at it. So I know the ones that's laughing, they like, I know what three, but others are like, what the? No, back there was a place called 42nd Street. People got all their money taken from them because they thought the ball was underneath the cup, and it was under the cup, but it's just that the person doing the scam, right, it was a scam, yeah. They were tricking the person, and somehow they were able to keep the ball not seen. So, okay, I just like, my whole mind just went to place. But you gotta be able to use money wisely. We don't have a lack of resources. We really don't. Actually, we live in a time where, if you're paying attention, we have abundance. Even if it feels like we don't, even if it feels like we've been given a limit, we're living in a time where the person who's been given a limit, if they understand what they've been given, they can become more resilient because of that, right? They know the other side of life, so therefore when they come to this side, they appreciate it more and they can do more because they know what it was to have not. And so to be able to be in a position where if you can donate, donate. And as they always say on a lot of the websites, man, make this a monthly donation. Make this a, you're like, sometimes when people go places and you realize how much money people or organizations are gathering, when it comes to social justice, we need that much more and then some. Because for frivolous stuff, man, you got, you know, I've seen things, it sounded like an auction, but I've seen things where people say, I'll start the bidding off $1 million. $1 million? That's Donald Trump paid $85,000 to put an ad like this in New York City's newspapers. That was 1989. That was a lot of money in 1989. That's definitely a lot of money now. Because the average person don't even make $85,000 a year. He's taking the crumbs off the table and just saying, you know what, let's do this. So we gotta pool our resources. We gotta use our privilege if we have it. And because they won't close the door on you, you gotta keep your foot in the door to allow those of us who have been closest to the pain to have a seat at the table.
First, I'd like to express my condolences for everything that you went through as a child. It's something that no one should ever go through. And I'm only 18 years old. I can't imagine having my teenage years quite literally taken away from me for something that you didn't even do. So it leads into my question of how differently do you think your life would be if you never went through any of what you did?
I would not be the person that I am today. It's interesting because there's times in all of our lives where we say, damn, if I would have did this, or maybe I could, you know, in the era of Afrofuturism, maybe somebody created a time machine and I could go back in time. But one change, one ripple of change is a ripple of change into the future. So that means that the children that you have, the existence that you have, everything that you know right now is different. The shy person that wanted to be an architect back in 1989, that was going to LaGuardia High School, wouldn't have found the strength to stand on my own 2 feet in a way that means something to me. Because I was that same young child that when I went in, well, first of all, I wanted to be a rap artist. I felt like I had bars. I went to ASCAP Records. Back then they had rap applications. And I went, picked up a rap application, took it home and got cold feet. So my debut as a rap artist, I had 2 debuts. One was when I was sentenced at trial. And they asked me if I had anything to say before they sentenced me. And the second found its way into Spike Lee's film, Jungle Fever. There's a scene in there where they're in restaurant, and one of the guys takes up a newspaper, and in the paper it's the New York Post. Interestingly enough, you can't find this actual article even on Google anymore. You can just see the top of it. The top of the paper, matter of fact, I gotta set the scene. So after I did the rap song, one of the reporters ran to the front of the room, and they asked me can I take a picture of your rap? And I said, absolutely. I felt like honored, you know? They took a photo, and then the next day, it was on the front page of the New York Post. And right above the poem, because you could clearly see it was a piece of paper with my handwriting written words on it. Right above it were the words, Salaam, baloney. And then when you go into the article, it says, you know, it was almost like clowning me. He went in there, rapping to the judge and the people and you know, all of this stuff. But in the scene, the guy picks up the paper and he starts reading some of my rap song. I'm a smooth type of fellow, cool, calm, and mellow. Throws the paper across the room and says, what the bleep, bleep, bleep is this? I'm cursing. You know, gotta make it up. I'm still on PG time. But it's amazing to find out why you were born. Because the color of our skin puts us in a precarious situation today. You're automatically fighting for your life if you have black or brown skin. You're fighting for your life in a way that you don't even realize until something happens. Because the proverbial American dream is what all people seek. And there are some who wake up to the American nightmare and they can never go back to sleep. They can never re-experience the so-called American dream. And folks like Trayvon Martin, folks like Tamir Rice, folks like Sean Bell, like they don't get the opportunity to have a different outcome. Sometimes I watch those types of events unfold, and then I rewatch it almost as if I'm like a movie director. Like maybe I can have the character just dunk. Maybe I can have the character do like Neo did. You know, when he found out he was Neo. He said, well, you gotta, you know, when the time comes, I won't even have to dodge bullets. I mean, that's like, who wants to, like that? It's that ability for us to be able to be like, no. And then all the bullets drop. But we are fighting in the blessing of the right side because of the color of our skin. And the more we know it, and the best we get the opportunity to have allies who might have the complexion for acceptance, it gives us a fighting chance, because not everybody who looks like they might be on the other side is really on the other side. There are folks who are waiting for the opportunity so that we can live in the kaleidoscope of the human family. There are folks that are waiting for that because they didn't participate in life so that you could be underneath their foot. But I would have never known any of this had I not had this awful experience that turned into a love story so that I could then share it from a different vantage point. I would have not had it. Like I love wearing suits, so that when Donald Trump or any of his homies see me on TV, it's like, he's still good. He looks good. You know.
That's your resistance.
You gotta resist, and I like kind of making a little bit of levity to it as well, right? Because you gotta cry. I mean, you gotta laugh instead of crying. Because if you don't laugh, if you don't get opportunities or give yourself opportunities, you know, my faith it says, فَإِنَّ مَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, right? Surely with difficulty comes relief. إِنَّ مَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Well, certainly with difficulty comes relief. But it doesn't stop there. It says, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَارْغَب. So when you're free, like in those moments when you get that ease, it might be just that you made it home. It might be that you're able to turn your water on and take a shower. That might be the ease. And when you're free from that immediate task, still labor hard. Order your steps to be put in the right direction so that you can do the work. Because if you don't do that, if you just want to say, man, I could have done that. Any of us could have. I'll never forget when we won our lawsuit, one of the reporters, it felt like a moment, like the same moment, like it was like deja vu. Like the reporter ran up to me, but this time she looked like me. She looked like one of my sisters, right? She said, Yusef, what are you going to do? You won. And I said, well, I'm not going to sit on the beach and sip Mai Tais. There's a lot of work to do. And it behooves us to work for the greater good. It behooves us to take our energies and our experiences so that we can become a light in the darkness. That's even why, like, this book, unfortunately, is not on sale. But I just want to read the introduction, last paragraph. This book is the reason why I wrote all of my other books, though. I said I wanted to share this work specifically because I wanted people to know that when you find yourself in so-called dark places, there's always a light somewhere in the darkness. And even if that light is inside you, you can illuminate your own darkness and shine your light on the world. And that's what it's all about. Had I not had this experience, I would have not been given the knowledge of how do you build in the darkness?
Hello. Thank you for the panel and your wonderful insight. Oh, my professor, wherever she is. Yes, so Yusef, you mentioned, I guess this question is for anyone who wants to answer, but you mentioned that your case is not a black and white issue, it's more of there's wickedness in high and low places. I wanted to ask you guys, what is the best way to approach this type of wickedness, especially if you feel like you're not strong enough, you're not powerful enough, especially if these people who are wicked are in these top high places or in these low places and they're the ones who make the big decisions. How do you, as a person, maybe our generation, the young generation, how do we fight against them even when you feel like there's no way? Because you don't want to stoop to the level of wickedness, but how do you fight them?
Never stoop to the level of wickedness. Know that you are supposed to be here. Like what I love about scripture, and I say scripture because I'm conscious of the fact that there are people who might ascribe to my faith, there are people who may ascribe to other faiths. But when I read a verse in one of the chapters in my scripture, and it said, this is the former scroll, the books of Abraham and Moses. Now we have the book of Moses. The creator of Islam is saying, this right here is the book of Abraham and Moses. It's almost like it's a reiteration. It's a reminder. But I mention that because in scripture it says, when God decides to do anything, he says to it, be. He told you to be. And therefore you are. We're waiting for permission to be. When we've been given permission by the great I am. We've been already told, you're supposed to be here. The challenge is that we're trying to find purpose. And Dr. King said, and I love this verse, I love this quote from Dr. King. He said, when you find your purpose in life, do it as if God himself called you to do it at this very moment. Instead of giving us a grand idea of what that could be, he said, if your purpose in life is to be a street sweeper, Sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep the streets like Beethoven composed music, like Leoton Price sang for the opera. I mean, we know in our heart that there is something that vibrates higher in our energy than anything else. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And you've already been given permission by the Creator. We always are told, because of our brilliance, because of our, I remember listening to Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart said, I think it was Kevin Hart. He said, all of us have what we need. He said, when you look at a child, if you can cultivate in that child the genius that they are exhibiting, they become who they became. But if the child is told, stop being a class clown, stop making so many jokes, Kevin Hart said he wouldn't have become Kevin Hart. Now that's on the other side, but we also need to be able to experience the joy of laughter while we look at this beautiful struggle. Because it's enough to make you want to pull over to the side of life, the road, the highway of life, and not even put your blinkers on, which indicates that you're in distress. There's some people that pull over on the side of the highway of the road of life, and they just shut their car off. They checked out. Don't check out. That's why I say live full so you can die empty. Because we're waiting for permission. We gotta know before we're giving it.
If it's okay, I wanted to add just one thing. I think Yusef really compellingly talks about the power of the individual, and I think it's also important to think about the power of the collective. All of these injustices that happen in court happen because they isolate you as an individual from your community, from your family, from the people who might be there to support you. Nobody should be going to court by themselves. You should be going to court to see what is happening there in your name. Court Watch is one of the most important things that has happened recently because all of these injustices, everything that happened to Yusef, to Dennis, to Stephen, and so many others in our community have happened without people knowing. And so you're here now. So the first thing is, you gotta educate, but also we gotta come together and organize, because of course each of us as individuals has incredible power, and we haven't even fulfilled all of that power, and we do need permission to do that. But also, we're a community, and we have to act together, because if you have that power in numbers, then that makes a difference, right? The system feeds on each case and the power of the state being able to pressure one individual, isolating them and pressuring them to plead guilty to move on to the next thing. That is the way the system works. And so for us to be able to stand up to that, you need immense support. You need family support. You need to support, your families, your friends, but also people you don't know, people in your community. And so I would say that's also critically important.
I would also just echo Yusef's comment earlier regarding the importance of voting, particularly in local elections that are too often ignored. Many district attorneys, including many in the Commonwealth, are elected, and district attorneys, again, have an immense amount of power in our system. And if you actually have a solid district attorney who's interested in integrity of convictions, then they can prevent these things from even making it into a courtroom. Thanks to Rachel Rollins being elected the district attorney of, what was her exact district, Radha? Suffolk County, yes. So there were investigations into questionable convictions, and I was actually able to consult on a case for which we were contacted by the district attorney's office to say, you contacted us about this case, our office about this case 5-6 years ago. We agree that it's potentially problematic. At the time, the district attorney's office said, yeah, it might be problematic. We don't have a case file. We don't have any information. All of a sudden, under a progressive district attorney, they had a 200+ page case file that they could give us to review so that we could actually meaningfully evaluate this questionable conviction as eyewitness experts and point to all the issues with the eyewitnesses that were used to secure this conviction. So pay attention to local elections, because district attorneys have more power in this country than you would think, and frankly affect your day-to-day life more than the congressional elections that get a lot more attention.
Hi, I just wanted to start off and say that I really admire your resilience and your ability to not hold any grudges, because I feel like if that was me personally, I would want to, get my lick back, But, okay, going to my question, I just wanted to ask, are you still recovering from the trauma you endured from being incarcerated for no reason?
Always. Always. There's a young man named Khalif Browder. Khalif Browder he went to prison. Really, he went to jail. They sent him to Rikers Island for a crime he didn't commit. And all along, they kept trying to get him to plead. And he said, I didn't do it. 3 years, or almost 3 years goes by before they finally say, okay, we're gonna let you go. But what happened in those years was so traumatic that he couldn't turn off the trauma. So even though a film was created for him, I think Jay-Z and company got together and did a great documentary about his story. He ends up taking his own life because he couldn't turn off the trauma. One of the great things that I found out through Dr. Maya Angelou, when she said, use that anger. And when she said you talk it, it occurred to me that we aren't neophytes. None of us are beginners when it comes to speaking. It's perhaps one of the most scariest things to get up to speak. But when you realize that you actually have been speaking since you learned how to say mama or dada, it is one of the most beautiful things to tell your story. As a matter of fact, I encourage all of us, those of us especially who have been run over by the spike wheels of justice, to tell your story. Because it's like a therapy session. I get the opportunity to talk about me and my story, but at the same time, because I've done so much work on myself, I get the opportunity to actually transform it and figure out how to assist others who are going through what they're going through so that we can grow through what we go through. And it's important because the trauma never stops. You just get the opportunity to juggle those limits that they gave you. Before you was like, I don't want these limits, I want money or diamonds or whatever. But when you get the opportunity to juggle limits, and then you start getting sturdy, like my son said, as you're juggling it, that's when it becomes fun. Because you realize that you had to gain the inspiration to keep going. And now you can inspire others to keep going. And we're not born just to live. And by living, many of us are born, if we're in the other side of town, we're living in the margins of life. We have to thrive, not just survive.
Thank you again so very much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. Let's give it up one more time for our panelists. to be a brief book signing to my, what side is that, to my left. If you brought a book with you, you can feel free to get online. The folks from the folks from Multicultural Affairs will help you line up. If you'd like to purchase a book, the bookstore is set up right outside. Thank you very much. We hope to see you at a number of our events coming up.